Okay, so let's look at A Different History by Sujata Bhatt. Great Pan is not dead. He simply emigrated to India. Here, the gods roam freely, disguised as snakes or monkeys. Every tree is sacred, and it is a sin to be rude to a book. It is a sin to shove a book aside with your foot, a sin to slam books down hard on the table, a sin to toss one carelessly across a room. You must learn how to turn the pages gently, without disturbing Sarasvati, without offending the tree from whose wood the paper was made. Which language has not been the oppressor's tongue? Which language truly meant to murder someone? And how does it happen that after the torture, after the soul has been cropped with a long scythe swooping out of the conqueror's face, the unborn grandchildren grow to love that strange language? So what we'll do is we'll look at how this poem is broken down now and think a little bit about what Sujata Bhatt is trying to say. The first thing to say about Sujata Bhatt is that she lives in this country, lives in England, and yet she was born in India, so she's really very much sees herself as being split between cultures. Split in the way that she feels part English and part Indian. Split in the way that she feels conflicted sometimes in her language. And this is a poem that we see is very much about language. Another one of her poems, Search for My Tongue, which is very worthwhile reading, also reflects on this idea of what her identity or where her identity lies when she considers herself to be neither fully Indian nor fully English. So let's think first of all about the title, A Different History. And straight away we get a sense of Sujata Bhatt wishing to rewrite history somehow with her poetry, to tell a different story. And think about the word history has the word story in it. That history is about stories. It's about stories of our past. It's about stories of wars. It's about stories of politics. It's about stories of conquest. But it's not a recorded story of what happened to those people who were conquered. What happened to those people who lost their land, lost their homes, lost their freedom to the conquerors. So we have Sujata Bhatt in this poem, as she does in many of her poems, wanting to look at this story and somehow rewrite the story from her perspective. So this is very much a different history or a different story. She begins the poem, Great Pan is not dead, he simply emigrated to India. Now Pan, the god of nature, the god of freedom, the god of liberty, the god of the fields, of farming, of abundance. This god is a god that has moved to India. And so straight away we get a sense of Sujata Bhatt saying that India is a free place, a place of great openness, of great land, of great plenty, a land of nature, and a land of natural things. So the idea of Pan, who the Roman god, has moved away from Europe, moved away from the cities, and has now taken residence, emigrated to India. So we get a sense from this first line here, this first sentence broken into three lines, that Pan is now resident in a new country, and a country of freedom and liberty, or a country that perceives itself at heart to be a free and liberal place, and Pan no longer residing in Europe. Interesting if we look at the way in which it's even broken up here, in the enjambment, the line break here, emigrated to India. And even the fact that India is on a separate line suggests a movement away from where he has been to where he is now. So we move on in the poem, and Bhatt then talks about the gods generally. Remember, in Hinduism there are many gods, and like the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Christian of Judaism, the God of Judaism and Christianity, the one God. There are many gods, and they roam freely. There's a sense that again, linking into Great Pan, moving to India, that there is a freedom, there is a movement, and there is a sense of joy um, in the way that the gods can really do what they like, and they disguise themselves as snakes or monkeys. Um, we know that the Hindu gods are given forms. They're given animal forms often, and it's a way in which the people can kind of understand their nature, understand um, their who they are, and what they do. And so we move on into the second half of the first stanza, and Bart is talking about the sins, and it's quite interesting here that she mentions language all the way through here, and again it's linking back. If we just look at this story, the idea of the story, that this is a different history, and this is a poem very much about what books do and what books are capable of doing. So she talks about the sin of being rude to a book, as the sin of shoving a book aside with your foot, of slamming books on a table or tossing one carelessly across a room. That somehow words and language have great power and great ability to change. And it's almost as if in this poem, Bart is highlighting the importance of language and the importance of literature. And the books, the great Veda, the great books of the Hindu religion, the Sanskrit, written in Sanskrit, that they somehow contain these sacred writings which have almost transferred into the modern day, and that all books, she's not talking about particular books, just books in general, that books have great weight and great status in this society. And it's interesting the way that she refers here to the second person you. There's a feeling with this poem, in many of Sujata Bhatt's poems, there's a feeling that she's addressing the reader almost as an instruction. But this is the voice also of her childhood. We get a voice coming through. You must learn how to turn the pages gently without disturbing Sarasvati. That her parents, her grandparents possibly taught her how to treat books with respect. And then it moves on here. To talk about Sarasvati. Sarasvati, the goddess, the Hindu goddess of music, arts, literature. The guardian, I suppose, of the literature, the books that she's talking about. And the idea of the fending a tree from whose wood the paper was made, that the Hindu, like the Buddhist religions, very much see the interconnectedness of all things. They see that the wood that was pulped to make the tree, there's a connection still between the tree and the book being read, in the way that there's a connection between the people and the world in which they live, that we're not separate, and neither is the book separate from the tree. So there's a real sense of this, again, thinking back to the first part when she talks about Great Pan isn't dead, that there is a great natural interconnectedness in India, that filters right the way down to the respect needed to be paid to a book. If we look then at the second stanza, and we can see this stanza break here between maid and which language, there's a change, and this change is indicated in two ways. Well, three ways actually. In fact, more than three ways, probably four ways. If we look at the first most obvious way, there's a line break or a stanza break here. The second difference is that if you look at the difference between the fact there's an indentation here. The third difference, she's no longer further indenting any lines. The lines become shorter, and also the voice changes. The voice changes from a voice of almost instruction. It is a sin to be rude. It is a sin to do this. You must do this. A voice of explanation, to a voice of questioning, and maybe a slightly more aggressive voice. So she goes on, which language has not been the oppressor's tongue, which language truly meant to murder someone? So the first question here, which language has not been the oppressor's tongue? And the oppressor is the British colonial oppressor, the oppressor of the 18th and 19th centuries, the oppressor who came across to India, who plundered India of its riches, who was made rich on the great wealth, the great natural wealth of countries like India. And so she's talking here about the language of the oppressor, the English language, and which language has not been the oppressor's tongue, as if the language itself is somehow the natural beauty of the Indian language has somehow been oppressed by the British colonial robber coming over. This is very much the sort of the aggressive tone of what we call a post-colonial poem, a poem which was written after the colonial era, from the sort of the late 18th century into the 19th century, and even really into the early part of the 20th century, before 1940. And the next question, which language truly meant to murder someone? Interesting that it's not words that murder people, it's people that murder people. That language has great beauty and great power, to be a force for change and a force for good, but it also has a ability to be a force for murder and for oppression. And that language, the tool of language, going back to the beginning of the poem here, where she talks about the sin of being rude to a book, that language has such great power that it can be a tremendously beautiful thing, but it also can be a thing which can lead people to murder. And then this last question, which actually is more of a statement. Interesting that even though it starts, how does it happen, it actually doesn't end with a question mark. We hear a frustration in Bart's voice. How does it happen that? How could it possibly have happened? Why did we allow it to happen? What allowed such an awful thing to happen? And there's this very powerful and very aggressive and very disturbing final sentence, which really is in very stark contrast to some of the beautiful language in the first half of the poem. How does it happen that after the torture, after the soul has been cropped with a long scythe swooping out of the conqueror's face, the unborn grandchildren grow to love that strange language? The strange language here, can have more than one meaning. Is it the language that she's lost? Is it the language that of her Indian ancestors? Or is it the language of the British oppressor, that loving the strange language? The unborn grandchildren are the people of the future who've moved from India and who have moved back into England. Is it that strange language that is the language of the oppressor that suddenly seems to be the language that these people now speak? So we've got these quite aggressive images: the torture, the soul being cropped with a long scythe, swooping out of the conqueror's face. The conqueror is the British, the colonial oppressor. I'm saying British. I mean, there were other countries who colonised other parts of the world, but if we look at India particularly, we see that it was very much a British operation. That Britain really were very much at the centre of the colonial exploitation of the Indian people. So this final stanza is a question to us. How did we allow this to happen? How did we allow an oppressor who tortured, an oppressor who had a long scythe? The scythe is the long blade which people used to crop. The long scythe swooping out of the conqueror's face. After all of this, how did we allow our unborn grandchildren grow to love a language which is not theirs, a language which actually is the language of the people who oppressed them? So we have a poem here, just in summary, which is a poem about language. It's a poem about the power of words. It's a poem about how words form stories, and those stories form histories. And the histories are the histories of the oppressor. The history we know of is the history that we read in history books. It's not the voice of these people. It's not the voice of the Indian peasant. It's the voice of the British conqueror. And what Barth does here, along with many other poets who write in a similar way, is she tries to reclaim some of that history. She tries to rewrite the story from the perspective of the oppressed, from the perspective of those people who didn't have a voice, and really only in the last 20 to 30 years finally have a story.